Dear Lovable, I am the General Counsel at Figma Incorporated. Figma is the owner of the Dev Mode trademark, which has been used extensively around the world in connection with our software platform. We're flattered that you agree Dev Mode is the ideal name for a software tool that helps bridge the gap between design and development. But as inventors and entrepreneurs, we're sure you can understand that we need to protect our intellectual property. We ask that you please cease all use of Dev Mode in connection with your products and services, rename your tool, and remove all references to our mark from your website, marketing materials, and other public-facing content. We'd like to resolve this amicably so we can each get back to building great products for our customers. Please write back as soon as possible. Let me know you've agreed to this request. I don't know how to start this one other than to say Figma. What the fuck? Are you joking? This is one of the most absurd things I've ever seen. I have heard weird stories of Figma doing strange things behind the scenes, but this takes the cake. There's a lot of layers to this, a lot of drama adjacent to this, a lot of trademarks that are kind of bullshit that they currently have. But if I'm going to talk about this, I need a little bit of cushion because if they sue me, I need the money to protect myself. So since Figma's not paying me, we're going to do a quick word from today's sponsor and then dive right in. Wouldn't it be cool to see your brand in a video like this one being shown to hundreds of thousands of motivated engineers that want to learn more about cool technologies and solutions and maybe even buy them and pay for them at their company? Well, I have some good news for you. We are a little low on inventory for the year, but we do have a couple slots left. You might be surprised how cheap it is to sponsor a video like this. If you want to learn more and put your brand in front of thousands of experienced engineers, especially those who are in the AI space, you can take my word for it, or you can read all these comments of people saying how great the ads are, or you can read the commentary from our other sponsors about how useful these ads have been for them. If you want to join the set of awesome brands that have been helping us make this content happen, email us today at youtube@t3.gg, and you can learn more at t3.gg/sponsor me. I'm going to be honest, guys. When I first saw this, I assumed it was fake. Quick bias check, just because I think it's important. Lovable has sponsored videos before. They are not sponsoring this. I have not reached out or talked to them at all about this. I think one employee is in my chat, but this video has no relation to Lovable whatsoever. I'm covering this because I'm pissed at Figma. You can say I'm biased or whatever, but if this was any other company, I swear I would be just as angry. This was my immediate public response that it seems like people enjoyed. And we also see here from Kara some other fun trademarks they have, including schema, and my personal favorite, config, as well as Summit and Forge. The reason they have config, for those who are wondering, is because they have a conference named config. And I happen to know some drama about this conference right now that I'm not in a position to share yet, but I have a feeling it will be public in the near future. Let's just say Lovable is not the only company that's getting some really weird notices from our friends over at Figma. This is absurd. We need to talk a bit about what's going on here, why they're doing this, and why trademark works this way at all. What the fuck, Figma? Let's get started. So I was hunting through for trademarks. Funny enough, there's a lot that mention dev mode or something like it somewhere. Most of these are nonsense, and almost all of them are dead. But dev mode is live and registered from Figma. If we look here, we can see this trademark was registered in November last year. It was originally applied for in June, but only officially became a trademark as approved by the USPTO end of last year, which means that there are probably a lot of other companies calling things dev mode that could be screwed over by this. That is particularly strange because I am near certain that there's a lot of prior art here. So first off, we should probably ask, WTF is dev mode? And to be clear that we're not talking about dev mode from other products, we're going to add the TM. We want people to think we mean dev mode, the generic, when we actually mean dev mode, the product. If you're somehow not familiar with Figma, it is a design tool, similar to what I'm doing over here with Excalidraw. By the way, I just said the name Excalidraw, so if all the comments are, what's the tool he's using to draw, I'm going to go insane. Figma's originally focused almost entirely on helping designers with a canvas built for making applications. Back in my day when I was learning how to code and build websites, you would mock up your websites in Photoshop. A lot of tools like Photoshop, Illustrator, and other graphic software were being used to make mocks for apps, and it was realized by a handful of people that that's not ideal. The strange differences between what editing an image looks like and what editing an app mockup looks like meant that there was a pretty rough spot there where you would either try and force design work into Photoshop or you'd give up and go to my old favorite software, Dreamweaver. I know the demographics for this channel. A lot of you guys are old enough that you absolutely used the OG Dreamweaver. So don't pretend you haven't. I know you have. Don't lie. pre-Adobe Macromedia Dreamweaver. Before Adobe was so big, they weren't allowed to acquire other companies. The good old days. Oh, Dreamweaver. Yeah. So it kind of felt like there was a spectrum where on one side you had Photoshop and on the other side you had Visual Studio or other like really heavy IDEs. We had a little spot here that was Dreamweaver, but it still wasn't like anywhere near as visual as the average like designer would probably be looking for. And as such, more and more people started to try and figure out what it looks like to build something in this range that is more app friendly and developer focused than Photoshop, but more design heavy and not code heavy, unlike Dreamweaver and VSC. This in-between area started to get random products thrown into it. We had Sketch, we had Adobe XD. I don't know which came out when, and I'm too lazy to look it up. I'm pretty sure Sketch was first, but I could be wrong. But eventually, we had Figma. Figma's biggest differentiator at the time is that it was browser-based. It also had a desktop app, but it was browser-based. The desktop app was an Electron app, but the real innovation of Figma was the crazy stuff they were doing to make it perform well in the browser. So you could do a canvas-like experience like we're doing here, but with app mockups. That combined with how generous the free tier was meant Figma very quickly took over. And by the time I joined Twitch in like 2017, Figma had fully taken over the company. It was very clear. Sketch was a one-time purchase license, but the commercial side of it was a bit of a mess. Adobe XD was an Adobe product, so nobody liked it anyways. Figma very quickly established itself as the winner of this app-focused design tool. It was a weird in-between, but it turns out that weird in-between is worth a lot of money. Enough so that Adobe killed XD and tried to buy Figma, got really far, inked the deal and everything, and then they got blocked by enough courts because of monopolistic practice that it didn't go through. And now Figma, since they literally can't be acquired, they're too big to be acquired effectively after that decision, they now have to win in order for all of the value the company has to ever be realized. If Figma's ever going to IPO so that its stock could become real money, they have to win hard now. Previously, they could have had a nice exit with an acquisition. That's been ruled out by the courts. So their only option is to make something so big, so dominant, such a strong force in the market that when they eventually go to sell stock, it will be worth a ton of money and they can make their money finally. Fun thing that just happened after I finished filming the video. My editor will stuff this wherever it fits. Figma just filed for a US IPO. Last year, they were valued at $12.5 billion after it closed a deal to allow employees and early investors to sell some of their stake to new and existing investors. They are now filing for the IPO. Makes a lot of sense. They need their brand to be perceived as valuable as possible right now more than ever. So they're going to be fighting tooth and nail to make sure any potential external risk to Figma's visible path to success is destroyed. Because if anything even looks like it might get in their way of success, the IPO goes much, much worse. We're talking about like a 5 to 10% difference being billions of dollars. They're going to fight hard now more than ever. And that's why we're going to start seeing this type of bullshit behavior more than we've ever seen it before. So Figma's had just absurd levels of success, but it needs to keep going if it's going to eventually turn that stock into money. Figma's original threats were Sketch and Adobe XD. But if we look at Figma's market share, you'll understand that these things were not actual threats. Do you understand? This is 2022. It's gotten worse since. Sketch was doing well, and Figma just comes in and wins the entire market. Entire market. It's not close. It's not like they have 30% or something. Figma won. So the risk is no longer, can Figma win the design world? That's already over. Figma already won design. That's not a conversation we need to have anymore. The numbers prove it. Figma's the winner of the design world. So what's left? I'll argue there are two things Figma has to do now. Thing one, find other markets to maintain growth. And two, protect the design industry at all costs. This is Figma's mission now. Figure out how we can grow by branching to adjacent places and protect the design industry so that we never lose that thing that we have a huge percentage of. So what does part one here look like? Ever heard of FigJam? FigJam was an attempt to do something similar to what I'm doing over there in Excalidraw. But the goal of FigJam was a collaborative workspace whiteboard thing so that you could talk with your team about stuff. This was a really interesting idea for a handful of reasons. First off, the people who run these types of things at companies tend to lean product, not engineering. If you're trying to talk about different things in your product and the direction you want your team to be moving in, that's probably going to be led by a product person. And if you were to spectrum out like what different roles exist at a company, I'd say product is all the way here. Maybe if we go a bit further, we'd say support all the way to the left there. Then you have product, then you have design, then you have front end, dev, then back end. Roughly. This is meant to give a rough idea of like how things relate back and forth. And you could argue that each layer here, the person in the middle, is the bridge between the other two. So when support notices a bunch of customers having a problem, they'll probably talk to product, the product manager, product team, whoever. Product will figure out what issues exist on the support side, and then talk with design about how to make the product clearer so these mistakes don't keep happening. Design will then work with product and eng in order to make sure those designs can actually be implemented and get them started in the implementation. Then front end will yell at back end to make sure their stuff actually works so they can actually ship it. This is a real rough idea of how companies work. What this means is that product is the place where a lot of the conversations really start. And because of that, product tends to be the group that leads the meetings where we do big product planning, quarterly management, all the things that you would use a fancy whiteboard with a team for. So if your product exclusively lives here and your goal is to expand like this, it makes a lot of sense you would go left first because that's kind of your bread and butter. And product tools are garbage. Product teams are the reason Jira still exists because they're tolerant of terrible things. And Figma really wanted to fix that with FigJam. And they failed. I think FigJam's actually dead. If not, it's close to it. I think they formally announced that. I might be wrong though. Was it not FigJam? What's the Figma thing they shut down? Oh, Google Jamboard. That was Google's. Okay, I misremembered. Google Jamboard is the one that is dead. Figma's is still alive and well. I don't know anybody using it, but it does still exist. Thank you, chat. Anyways, FigJam was very clearly an attempt to expand Figma's presence further towards product. But that's not the only thing they did. Soon after, not that soon after, but relatively soon after, they started expanding the other way. And that's what dev mode is. Dev mode was an attempt by Figma to make it easier to take a mock in the Figma app and export code from it, be it CSS, HTML, even theoretically React code. And ideally, if they get everything right, you'd be able to throw it into your editor directly or use the Figma plugin inside of VS Code. I have a whole video about this that I dropped right when it was originally announced. I tried playing with it, didn't have a good time with it, and moved on. And honestly speaking, I've been using Figma less and less. I barely touch it nowadays. There's a combination of reasons why. Tailwind's made it a lot easier to mock things up fast. More importantly, AI tools have made it comically easier to make a decent enough looking thing. And also, I don't have a designer that's working with me full-time right now, so there's less incentive. And usually when I hire designers, I'm hiring eng-leaning ones, and they're just going to start by going into the code anyways. So they went left with FigJam, and they went right with dev mode. These were their attempts to expand the potential market for Figma products, and I'd go as far as to say they weren't very successful. We'll do a quick poll, because this is an audience of devs. Have you used Figma's dev mode? Yes, often. Yes, not often. Yes, stopped using. No, never used. I use it, but only because it has a ruler. Oof, yeah. The dev mode experience sucks ass. This is what I've heard mostly. I'm very familiar with Framework. It's a cool product. So in my dev-heavy audience, here you go. The numbers kind of speak for themselves. There aren't a lot of people who are using Figma's dev mode, especially when we, again, compare to those insane numbers here, where they have like well over 80% of the market. Like way, way over. It's higher than that now. I saw numbers as high as 95 in the past. So they won design. They can't even make a splash in dev. They're struggling a lot. So I hope that we've established here, Figma is struggling a lot to break into these other spaces, especially the dev world. But something else happened that's important. This is where we need to talk about point 2. AI dev tools got really good. Important to realize how much this has changed the trajectory of Figma. Figma's bet was effectively that these designs were so valuable and developers needed these designs so badly that building a tool for the designers to provide mocks that are usable and useful to the developers could be a many, many multi-billion-dollar industry. And they weren't wrong, certainly not at the time. But some of these AI dev tools have meaningfully reduced the amount of help you need from designers. They're far from perfect. I'm not going to sit here and pretend otherwise, but they are so much better than devs previously would have needed to rely on. There's a spectrum I drew a while back. I want to see if I can find it. It's going to be a weird comparison, so hear me out. It's a diagram I drew when I was talking about HTMX versus Next.js. And the reason I drew this diagram is to try and frame the back end and front end and when different parts are necessary. If you're building an app that is just a couple forms with a really complex backend that has to scale well and process tons of data, and the website is just a basic form and a page that shows the current state of the infra, you don't need much on the front end side. So if we were to show how far and how much any given piece needs, the backend would be a majority of the complexity, and the front end here would be really small. So the backend could be this big complex thing. The front end doesn't have to be. But there is a spectrum here where the server is more complex versus the client being more complex. If the backend is where the complexity lives, building that backend with front-end tools probably isn't the best bet. Even using Node might not be the best bet depending on what you're building here. But if you're building a Twitter clone, the backend is a hell of a lot less complex, and the front end is a hell of a lot more complex. At which point, the tools you pick should be able to handle that level of complexity well. Building a good Twitter clone that feels nice to use with HTMX would suck, the same way building a complex infrastructure with Next.js would suck. The interesting thing about HTMX is it meaningfully moved the line for where do you need to adopt a front-end framework. Previously, in order to have a front-end framework that was could go further left than here, let's say, you would need to adopt something like React. You'd have to go all in on single-page apps and let the client own its state. As soon as you have a certain level of interactivity in your page, you effectively need a client-side framework. HTMX said, wait, do you though? And they moved this line pretty far down. So there are lots of levels of complexity your front-end apps can have where you don't need to adopt a tool like React. HTMX is much more back-end focused. It lets you update the state of the page from the server without having to reload the entire content of the page, which makes more interactivity possible without having to write client-side code. Before HTMX, and honestly before Intercooler and things like it, if you had a comment section on your blog and somebody left a comment, the whole page would have to reload to see that, or they'd have to load some JavaScript single-page app style, so when they leave the comment, it would update the DOM using React, Angular, even jQuery. A lot of client-side code would be necessary in order to do that type of good experience. HTMX challenged the notion and said, wait, for basic page updates that are server-driven, what if we just update the HTML in place instead? Which is really nice and powerful, and there's a reason why people love HTMX. It's because they don't need all the things React can do. They're not building a heavily interactive app like T3 Chat. They're trying to build something that just shows what the backend's current state is with a little bit more interactivity. So why am I talking about all of this? Well, I'm going to copy paste this guy into our new diagram, and hopefully you'll see why. If we change this from server to client to design and develop, and we change this to front-end code and designs or mocks, I'll even say Figma mocks specifically. Kill all that. There would be a point where a front-end dev isn't good enough to design the thing. If you look at my homepage, you don't need a designer to design this page. If somebody was to take the time to mock this up in Figma, I would probably make fun of them, and I hope you would too, because it's not a complex design. This does not need a whole lot of effort to make. But if you're trying to do something like T3 Chat, you'd benefit a lot more from making proper mocks in something. So it's important to think for any given project, how complex is this design such that we want to take the time to mock it, and how competent are your devs to get by without having those mocks? So for some projects, the bar might be here because, we don't really care. We just needed to show the data quick. We don't care how nice it looks. Some projects might be all the way down here where it's mocks are the only thing that make this product viable. Without them, we're not going to get anything done. Previously, I would argue there was very little you could do with just front-end code. You effectively needed to have a designer doing things in Figma if what you were building was more complex than a basic form or a dashboard. And by dashboard, I mean just a table, effectively. And even then, having design help would be nice. The crazy thing that has happened due to AI tools is very similar to HTMX, where these AI-focused developer tools have effectively made it so you can go way further without needing a designer to help. If we were to say that further left is a beautiful design and further right is T3.gg design, my design capabilities pre these AI tools were here, and I needed a designer to save me. But now that we have V0, Lovable, Bolt, and all these other tools, especially V0, because it's really good at UI, this has shifted quite a bit for me. And I've been amazed at how far it has. I never thought I would see the day where I could just go to a chatbot and say, hey, make this, and it will make something that looks good enough. And since the output is code, not a design in a mock software, I can dive into the code and play with it the way I normally do. So it allows for me as a dev to go way further in design without needing a designer, without needing Figma, without needing mocks. And it comes out in the language I want, which is code, ideally React if you're a React developer. And now I can take this design that I previously would have had to pay a designer for, then spend all the time making a first version, go back to the designer, get more feedback, and like iterate back and forth. Now I prompt an AI bot. It gives me a starting point with code. If there are things I don't like about it, I ask it to try again. If I just don't like it entirely, I will hit the reroll button. It's so much easier to get way further without needing to go hire a designer. When I first started Ping, my first hire was a designer because it was so hard to find good designers and I was not competent enough to do it. The original versions of Ping were so disgustingly, hilariously ugly. But I don't have a designer I employ right now. I have a design engineer working with us part-time. Shout out to Dom, he's been killing it. But we don't have a full-time designer anymore because we haven't needed it for a while. We originally moved away from having designers because we were focused on dev tools. Now we're not, and we still haven't found the need for it. You can go so much further without a designer now. And this puts point 2 here for Figma at risk. The design industry is legitimately at risk of getting smaller now. Previously, every company shipping software probably needed a designer at least part-time. Now, a significant portion of them probably don't. That's a huge risk for Figma, especially because the output of these tools isn't something you can use in Figma. The output of these tools is on the other side. It's something you can use in your editor. If these AI tools were spitting out Figma mocks so you need a designer to go in and tidy up, they'd be in a great place and I'm sure they'd be hyped. Instead, they're throwing really, really weird pot shots and going out of their way to damage these AI code building tools because they are putting Figma's entire place in the industry at risk. And again, I can't say the details, but I will say confidently, Lovable is not the only company dealing with shit like this right now. And it makes sense why. Figma's in a weird spot. Figma can't be acquired. And again, at a company of this size, acquisition is usually your exit plan. So they can't be acquired. Figma struggles to win devs. Figma's industry is at risk. So what happens when you can't sell to make your money, you can't expand the marketplace to make more money, and the thing you're currently making money from is at risk? This leads to what I call the Netscape effect. Microsoft realized that the internet was going to risk the entire model they had for how software was going to work long term. Microsoft realized that people wouldn't be going to stores to buy disks with licensing fees anymore. They saw Netscape and its success in the browser space and realized, oh, we need to win here. And that's why they made a free browser to compete with the paid Netscape app and also built functionality into Windows to make it really, really good for Internet Explorer and kind of hostile for other browsers. And that led to Microsoft getting sued so hard that they ended up having government people full-time employed at Microsoft just looking for more antitrust practice going on in order to prevent this in the future. It's one of like the biggest antitrust lawsuits in history. And by the time it wrapped up, Netscape had already shut down because they ran out of money. Figma's the new Microsoft, which is crazy when you think about it. But that's the position they're in. They're losing their base. Their base is getting smaller. They're struggling to grow into other spaces. And the whole industry category they're in looks like it is starting to shrink. Figma seems to be scared shitless right now. And when you're a billion-dollar company that is scared, that fear tends to come out like this, with what I would consider to be an absolutely bullshit trademark suit. I do want to try and steelman them quick because there are real reasons you would do something like this. Why would you ever do this? Obviously, the optics of this are terrible. If Figma's goal was to make devs like them, they just made that 10x harder for themselves for no good reason. They probably assumed Lovable was a safe thing to sue because Lovable isn't as popular in the dev world as some of the other tools are. They're wrong, though, because that went really viral, and the optics of this are terrible. But again, to try and steelman it, the only reason your company would have a real vested interest in doing this other than screwing with your competition is if you don't enforce your trademark, you lose it. So if I was to trademark Vibe code, for example, use it in my product, had a trademark through USPTO where I own the wordmark of Vibe code, and then everyone started using the term and I didn't enforce it. I didn't go after them and say, hey, that's not actually Vibe code because that's my trademark. A petition could be made to strip that trademark from its owner. This is going on right now with JavaScript, believe it or not. Oracle owns the JavaScript trademark because they acquired Sun Microsystems, who owned the trademark originally. JavaScript isn't Java, but it was similar enough, and the goal was to feel like it, and more importantly, be as portable as Java, which is why it got named JavaScript. Neither Sun nor Oracle have ever done anything meaningful with it. Oracle in particular has never done anything with JavaScript. They don't have a JS engine. They don't have JS materials. They have one tiny little SDK for web apps that doesn't even work and has been maintained for a very long time that they have used as their justification for maintaining the trademark. They've also done some sketchy stuff, like sue a random dev who made a Rust for JavaScript devs book, suing him and threatening him because he doesn't have the right to use the word JavaScript in the title of the book. Absolute absurdity. They're currently being sued by our friends over at Dino. I have a whole video about this too if you're curious. Dino is going through the process to argue to USPTO that JavaScript is a generic term and it cannot be restricted in the way it is right now because they're not using the trademark. They are keeping what they consider to be an invalid trademark, and personally, I do as well. I don't think Oracle is using this trademark in a meaningful way. They are holding it so they can sue people for using it, not because they're using it themselves. The only good faith why I think they might be doing it that is even slightly defensible is if they give up the JavaScript trademark, it might risk the Java trademark, which they are absolutely using and enforcing. That line is blurry enough I can sympathize a bit, but that's about as far as it can go. Another really common one that you guys have probably seen a bit about is Nintendo's trademark chaos. And I'm going to do a fun contrast here between Nintendo and Sega's trademark vagueness. Nintendo is known for being very litigious with their trademarks. If you put something that even vaguely looks like a Pokemon or Mario in something that isn't officially Nintendo, there's a good chance they're going to come after you for it. They've even sued for things as absurd as the trademark of a ball being thrown at a monster. It's kind of absurd. But the reason they do that is because in Japan especially, the rules around losing a trademark if it becomes a generic are much more open, and it's very easy to lose your trademark if you're not careful. So Nintendo very strictly enforces their trademark because their whole business is built on their exclusive right to things like Mario. If anyone could make a Mario game and anyone could make a Pokemon game, Nintendo would lose a huge portion of their value because, let's be real, they're not making money because of their hardware. They're not making money because of their network code. They're not making money because of much. Certainly not the quality of the store. The Switch store is one of the most pathetic pieces of software I've ever used in my life. Their trademarks and their IPs are what make them valuable, so they strictly enforce them. Who knows what makes Sega valuable? I want to see if chat can guess this one. Where does Sega make their money right now? I love that it's 50-50, but half of you got it right. Gambling, slot machines. If you didn't know this, a while back, Sega got acquired. Sega Sammy was a merger that happened way back because Sammy Holdings Company was making a lot of money selling pachinko machines and other gambling things in Japan. And they had a really, really bad reputation. They were starting to look very bad to the public. Sega was failing because the Dreamcast just lost compared to the other consoles. And Sammy saw the opportunity to buy Sega mostly for the sentiment win. They could use the name Sega as their public name, which has a positive reputation, to hide the fact that they were doing other things with their business. And this went very well for them. This basically allowed them to flip sentiment and get away with continuing to do terrible things. But because of that, the value of Sega's trademarks are not that they have the exclusive rights to them. To be frank, Sega doesn't really care what you do with Sonic. The goal of Sonic isn't to make them a lot of money directly. The goal of the whole Sega brand is to have enough positive sentiment that they're less likely to have a big flip that causes them to lose their gambling business. So Sega's goal with their trademarks is not to use them to make money. It's to have positive sentiment with the community. So they kind of let you do whatever. Nintendo needs to sell the things that they make with those trademarks, so they can't do that. Sega doesn't give a shit. Hopefully this helps contrast the difference between these two here. So what the fuck is Figma doing? I think Figma's in a weird spot here because, in my opinion, dev mode is a BS trademark. That's a term we've used for things for so long. Dev is a generic, mode is a generic. The combination of the words is very generic, and there have been a lot of tools, and I'm positive there is good prior art to dev mode being used in other places. Because it is such a bullshit trademark, and because it just got approved very recently, as we saw here, November of last year, in order for them to not lose it, they have to be strict as hell with it. And I think that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing Figma protecting this trademark at all costs because it is a bullshit trademark and they are scared of losing it. But as we saw earlier, bullshit trademarks are kind of their thing, as they have config trademarked, they have schema trademarked, they have factory trademarked. Seems like they've gotten away with this for a while, and they want to make sure they can continue to. I also don't think they've gotten a proper blowback for it, because I don't think they've went after a prominent enough figure in a public space like this before. So the combination of dev mode being a bullshit trademark, the necessary nature of protecting your trademark to keep it, and the weird position Figma is in, where their market is shrinking and they're failing to grow it, they're acting irrationally. And it's kind of pathetic to see a multi-billion-dollar company act like this. But this is kind of the end of the friendly, nice guys Figma that we have liked to pretend they were for a while. I have felt that going away for a bit now, but this is a real oh, it's over now, isn't it? One other important detail, because people might not know this, tools like Lovable actually let you import from Figma. So I can import a design from Figma and generate code. I can do it here. I can do it in Bolt, import from Figma. I can even do it from V0, import from Figma. Figma is now a button you click in other people's tools. They don't want that. They want the opposite. They don't want V0 or Lovable or Bolt to be the thing people export their Figmas to. They want Figma to be the tool they do the exporting with. And the more that these tools allow you to import from Figma, the more companies that are using Figma are going to start trying them, and the more likely they are to cancel their Figma subscriptions in favor of just using V0 in the first place. The more that happens, the less money Figma can make, the less likely they are to have a successful IPO and make all their investors and their founders and everybody else a whole bunch of money. They are scared, they're acting scared, and this is an absolute bullshit trademark that I hope they lose in court. Yeah, what a ride. I got nothing else. Thank you guys as always, and hopefully my use of the word dev mode throughout this doesn't get me sued. Until next time, peace nerds. I just went the whole video without making a Ligma joke. Aren't you guys proud?